Hello, everybody. My name is Jim, and this is part one of my reading wrap up for September 2023. Part one of two because I decided to participate in Angelia's Shorty September Challenge. Her channel is Read and Reread. I will link to it in the cards up above and in the description below, but I thought it was a good idea to go through some of the short stories that I had on my TBR and read them, as well as some others that were part of the same collections. I didn't read all short stories in each collection. I picked out the ones that I thought were the most interesting, and I read those. So without further ado, I'm going to review the 6 short stories that I read this month, with the first one being Randomize from the Forward collection. This one was written by Andy Weir, and I gave it 2 stars, mostly because it took a little too long to start up. We weren't even introduced to the main character until about halfway through. The plot of the story led up to a casino heist, which was pretty interesting when it actually happened, but it was such a short part of the story. I feel like if this were a longer book, then I probably would have DNF'd early on. There was a lot of quantum physics talk and science and math that just went over my head. I didn't really understand what was going on a lot of the time and what the characters were really talking about. But again, once we got to the actual casino heist, it ramped up. It got a little more interesting, but again, it was such a short part of the story that it wasn't enough to pull it back up. I did enjoy the woman. I can't remember her name, and I'm going to have a hard time remembering a lot of these characters and certain details of these short stories because there are so many. But I do remember enjoying her character, her part of the plot. I thought she was smart. She was witty and funny, crafty. None of the characters were necessarily good in this story, and I enjoyed that too. The Best Girls from the Disorder collection by Minjin Lee. She is the author of my favorite book, Pachinko, which I've gushed about before in past videos, but this story got a 3-star rating from me, and that's again because it took a little bit of time to start going. It took some time for the story to actually sink in. I do think that that was on purpose, and I plan to reread this story again to maybe either solidify my rating or rate it up. I don't think it'll go down, but it could possibly go up upon reread. I think this story is supposed to be slow. It's supposed to be about this girl's everyday life, and in the beginning, I was a bit bored because it seemed a bit typical, but as the story goes on, you realize that her parents and her grandparents don't appreciate her. They undervalue her and her sisters, and they prioritize the success of her brother after all of her successes and all the good things that she does to, well, what should bring joy to the family, right? She is underappreciated. She's undervalued. It doesn't matter how much success she has. It's going to go unnoticed in favor of her brother, and it's just not fair. There's favoritism, misogyny. It's a really distressing, bleak story. I would recommend reading this if you want to. Just know that it's gonna make you feel a little bit hopeless, a little sad, and yeah, this story, even though it was a 3-star for me, again, it could be rated up. This is definitely a high 3-star. Summer Frost by Blake Crouch is my first dip into Blake Crouch. I have a few of his books on my TBR right now. This was a 5-star read for me, so great first impression for Blake Crouch. I look forward to reading more from him. I haven't really gotten into science fiction very much, so reading short stories was a good way to dip into that. This is about AI. Scary already, I know. But what really drew me in was this was about a video game NPC who was designed to die in the first cutscene of a video game. This developer, I believe, named Riley, took it upon herself to make Max, who is the NPC, her personal project. She wanted to see how far she could take Max's AI when Max went against the grain during the cutscene and started doing their own thing. So Riley works with Max. It consumes her job. She is already a workaholic, but this just makes her work even more, longer shifts. You really get to see how far AI goes. What is the cost of playing God? This story elicited some verbal responses from me. But it was a fun read. I enjoyed it, and I do look forward to reading more from Blake Crouch in the future. There Will Come Soft Rains by Ray Bradbury is another 5-star short story read that I read at the very last minute. I added this at the very last minute. I added this on September 30th because I watched Angelia's. I was finally able to get around to watch Angelia's video on this story. Work has been just so busy. I haven't really had the opportunity to watch what other people are saying. Her synopsis of this story gave me chills. And when I read it, the chills continued from front to back. It's another AI story, which I have determined is something that I like. But in this case, and this, keep in mind that this story was written in 1950. In this story, the AI is a house. There has been a nuclear apocalypse, I think. A bomb has gone off in a city in California. The family who inhabited this smart house, their outlines are splashed against the outer wall while the rest of the wall is covered in soot. So just imagine that. Very eerie imagery. The house, however, continues on like nothing has happened. It does its daily chores. The alarm goes off in the morning. There are voices going on in the house dictating what each robotic thing is doing at the time at any given moment. They cook, they clean, they open the garage, and all of this is done for absolutely no one. There's no one living inside the house. So the house is given its own characterization, but it still feels very empty and eerie and creepy. There is a dog. There is a content warning around the dog. I'll just leave it at that. But that is the only living being that we are introduced to throughout this entire story. Everything else is AI, and yeah, like I said, chills from front to back. I can't really say any more without spoiling it, but you do get to have that feeling of there being action, but still having that really empty, eerie, post-apocalyptic dystopian feeling that I imagine you get from other books like this, but I don't know because I haven't read too much science fiction. Anonymous by Uzodinma Iwala. He is an auto-borrow or an auto-buy author for me. I have another book that I'm going to talk about in part 2 of this wrap-up that was also written by him that I'm currently reading and about 72% of the way through. But with Anonymous, the subject matter of this story is the exact reason why I DNF'd Falling. The moment that I realized Middle Eastern characters were being used as the villains of a plane hijacking plot. Anonymous is about a man who goes on regular business trips, just very ordinary, very mundane. If you work in the corporate world like I do, this is a typical thing. You travel all the time, or you know, at least I did before COVID struck and now everything is remote. But at the time, he was traveling to different countries for business meetings, conferences. Typical. He is stopped at customs at the airport and pulled aside. They take him to a dark room and they begin torturing him for information that he does not have. This story is so frustrating, and it's not because of how Uzodinma Iwala wrote it. It's tough, it's raw, very obvious racism and xenophobia. To actually be in his mind and to, I don't even want to say experience what he's going through, but you know what I mean. We're seeing this through his eyes, his perspective, so we are, quote, experiencing it. So you're going through this and it's just horrific, it's terrible, it's so disheartening. I gave this story 5 stars because I feel like the timing was perfect after DNFing Falling. And finally, this one is not a 5-star read. I rated this one 3 stars, but I felt like this one needed a little bit more of a discussion. This is Emergency Skin by N.K. Jemisin. This is part of the Forward collection, just like Randomize and Summer Frost. Everybody was raving about this story in that collection. It wasn't initially on my radar, but I decided after I saw all the reviews that I would add it to mine. It's a lot of people's favorite. I understand why they rate it 5 stars and enjoyed it, because I did think that it was pretty funny. The premise is that the rich 1% have launched themselves into space to basically escape a doomed world. They're there, and now they have to return to collect something. I can't remember exactly what they were going back to collect, but they were going to go back to Earth to pick something up, where they realize, oh, civilization is thriving. You know, the climate is back to normal. Everybody's getting along. You know, basically, why did we escape? Were we wrong? I do believe that this was after a climate crisis had occurred already. So, you know, if you're thinking that, oh, they came back and the world didn't change, then wouldn't that make them right about climate change? No. This was after a climate crisis. That's the reason why they left in the first place. So they come back to collect, and you are listening to this perspective, this one-sided perspective of this AI, again, speaking to one of the founders when they realize, oh, it's a lot better than, you know, it was when we left it. They're kind of confused about it, which is funny because the AI said before he landed, you know, expect anything, but he was so astonished and just so confused that everything looked good. The problems that I had with this story, I feel like it was a bit too simple. There was a political message in this, and I think it's really difficult when you are providing political commentary in a short story like this, because there are things that unfortunately you might miss. Hey, it's Future Jim. This story messed with my mind. I ended up rating this 4 stars because after thinking about it, my cynical side and the side that enjoyed this story for what it was outside of the political message were really going at it. Like, they were throwing hands. My insides, if they had eyes, they would be black right now. They would be bruised, and it was just a lot to kind of consider because, like I said immediately before this, it's very difficult to insert a political message into a short story, especially one that's so America-centric, because our world is so vast. Other countries have different problems depending on where you go. It could be something completely different. So having the world as a whole be a better place, a bit more utopian, it would have been nice to know a little bit more about the global impact, how everyone kind of got together. I know that they explained some of it, but I don't think that it was enough to put into a short story like this. It was just limited space, and the cynical side of me was reading this like, I don't see how this could happen, because the 1% only accounts for some of the problems in the grand scheme of things, if you think about it. But those left behind on Earth when they rocketed off, I imagine in a few centuries, well, maybe not a few, they just said centuries. I don't think they gave an exact number. So this could be like 900 years into the future. There would have been battles and wars to get to this place that the Earth is in, and that was not explained really at all, although it is a pretty nice middle finger to the people who deserve it. So it's like I'm in between. I ended up rating this up 4 stars, like I said. I would definitely recommend that you read this, especially if, you know, you're looking for a political message that's written with humor. She did a great job making this humorous, but man, I really had to sleep on this one. It probably deserves a 5, but again, I'm very negative. I'm very pessimistic. I'm very cynical. I don't think certain things will work. And so I'm gonna give it a 4. You know, being pessimistic about what this story is about, you know, I think a 4 is pretty solid. So I'm gonna leave it at that and then throw it back to Past Jim. So with that out of the way, if you're interested in reading any of these short stories, their Goodreads links are down below in the description. Give them a try. I don't know how you should go about getting them, though. A lot of them are Amazon exclusives. You can read them for free if you have Amazon Prime. Ray Bradbury's There Will Come Soft Rains is the only one that I actually had to borrow from somewhere. So go to your library and check it out if you want to, or use your library app to borrow it from there. Otherwise, I've been Jim. You've been great. Happy reading.